So, I don't know what it is, but Universal Studios Florida seems to be cursed, getting bad attraction after bad attraction. If you've watched me for a while, you know that I've been optimistic about Universal's future, because it seems like they've really turned things around, moving towards physical rides that impress the way that they did 30 years ago, after an entire decade of people complaining about their screen-based experiences. They certainly haven't dropped the projected media, but when they do use it, it has been used in completely new and innovative ways, whether it be through the wraparound screen of the Bourne Stuntacular, or with the implementation of the augmented reality glasses for Mario Kart. So, all of a sudden, on July 15th, Universal Studios Florida soft opened Villain-Con Minion Blast, and I quickly rushed over to the park to experience it. If you haven't already guessed from the video title and the context, it's actually pretty terrible, and while I have been seeing lukewarm reception, I just cannot see this as anything other than a complete miss. While I will give it credit for being unique, as it is a target shooter attraction on a moving walkway, it does just feel like another campy, screen-based experience, and it just does not work very well. Technical issues aside, the gameplay design is fundamentally boring and uninteresting. With this attraction comes a larger refurb to this area of the park, replacing what was the Monsters Cafe with what is now the Minions Cafe, as well as adding a few new interesting and well-themed storefronts. It's a shame because this is a legitimately interesting attempt at enhancing this area of the park, but the attraction itself is just unbelievably bad. So let's dive right into what is one of the most recent unfortunate misses for Universal. When you first walk into Universal Studios Florida, I am of the opinion that the entry area has always been rather weak. Hollywood, which was always intended as the park's version of a Main Street USA, is strangely located to the side, and so most people don't actually go that way, instead heading straight further in and into Production Central. Since the park was conceived with actual film production in mind, the soundstage theming has always made sense for what the park has been trying to do. And if you know anything about its history, you'll know that plenty of attractions have come and gone throughout this area. However, prior to this becoming Minion Land, which is designated by an interesting sign, I have always felt that the area has been a little bland. For the last decade, the area was inhabited by Despicable Me, Minion Mayhem on the left, which is an okay simulator attraction reusing the old building and ride system that has been used for other attractions since the park opened in 1990. On the right, the current soundstage inhabited by Villain-Con was home to Shrek 4D, which was not great, but was just kind of something to do. Moving further into Production Central, Music Plaza was located on the left, also including Hollywood Rip Ride Rockit, which ties into it thematically, and on the right, that's where the Monsters Cafe was previously located, which I do think was really well themed, and I'll very much miss. However, while this area was very much intended to offer an eclectic number of experiences based around the loose theme of movie production, it just didn't resonate very well aesthetically. I'm glad to see that Minion Land does not take anything away, still putting the sound stages front and center, and only decorating them loosely to still keep that idea intact. That being said, was this likely a decision meant to produce something new on a lower budget? I'm sure that it is, but thematically, I think it's important to keep the sound stages as a prominent element that ties multiple different park experiences together. If I can say one good thing about Villain-Con, it's that I like what it's doing aesthetically for this area, especially with how it contrasts with the Despicable Me building. Moving further in, the series of facades inhabiting the former Monsters Cafe are probably the most positive aspect to come out of this project. In the alleyway on the side, a theater facade includes covered meet and greet space for various Illuminations characters, but otherwise, everything else is themed to the Despicable Me or Minions franchises. The Bake My Day Bakery is a welcome, fun addition, offering a solidly themed store with a decent selection of sweets. The only criticism I have here is I think it's missing some kinetic elements, especially since there's a playful Ferris wheel that could be moving in the window. Moving further down, Freeze Rate Pops is a small window selling a variety of frozen popsicles, and moving further, there's the Bank of Evil, which is just a facade that adds a bit of visual contrast. The adjacent building is painted with minions, and finally you reach the Minion Cafe at the end. Aesthetically, it's a fun, bright space that really stands out among the other dining options in the park. While I don't think it's better than the Monsters Cafe, as that was really well detailed and had such an interesting theme, I do really like that it revives this area of the park in its own way. It too is full of details and Easter eggs, and while I'm not really a fan of the films, I do think it does offer a lot of interesting references for those that are. As with Bake My Day though, I do think that it is missing some sort of kinetic element, especially with such an interesting piece in its center room. When I was walked to my table, the team member who did so gestured to this piece and joked about how Kevin was preparing the spaghetti, which is a nice thematic touch. I just wish that the different elements were moving here, as it again seems like an obvious missed opportunity. In terms of food, I did order both specialty drinks. The purple drink is the PX41, which is a lemonade with strawberry and kiwi flavors, and I thought it was okay, but didn't drink too much of it since I've been hearing that the purple dye has been wrecking people's digestive systems. The yellow drink, known as the Antidote, was much better, which is a banana-flavored soda. The entree that I ordered was the steak and cheese ray sandwich, which was attempting to fuse French onion flavors in with pimento cheese on a cheddar and onion roll, and along with the minion-shaped tater tots, it was all just pretty okay. However, as someone who expects a little better than cafeteria quality from theme park restaurants, I do really like the trend of offering creative food options, which does elevate what is otherwise generally mediocre food pretty well. It's the reason I enjoy places like Pim's Test Kitchen or Toadstool Cafe, and Minion Cafe continues this trend as well. On the topic of food though, I do have two last comments. First, just outside of Minion Cafe is Pop Banana, which is a popcorn stand serving banana-flavored popcorn, which I tried, and I think it is pretty decent. Second though, is that Minion Cafe itself has a confusing ordering system. While it did take me half an hour to get my food, which I think is understandable because just like Toadstool Cafe, it's completely overwhelmed just because it's new, and I think will normalize over time, the actual ordering process is strange. There's a long line of people who accumulate out the door, and guests are instructed by team members on how to order their food through the Universal Orlando app. While I understand why Universal would want to move to mobile ordering, I don't understand why standing in line is still required, and there's no signs outside indicating that this is how it should be done. There's still a small register just inside if you don't want to order on your phone, but I do think the process is weird, especially when Disney has trained people through their mobile ordering system to just come up to a window once they're notified that their food is ready. While the ordering process was smooth, it was just odd, and I think it would make more sense to allow people to come up and get a table once the app indicates that the food is ready, instead of having everyone stand in a line. Overall, Minion Cafe and the new facades are a nice and colorful addition that refresh Production Central, and despite my small nitpicks, is very much a positive change. Moving on to Villain-Con, this is where things become really disappointing. Before we begin, I do want to point out that while ride-throughs of the attraction have been posted online, Universal made it very clear that because it is still in technical rehearsals, there was to be no filming inside, and so I won't be showing anything other than what was posted by various invited news outlets. That being said, the attraction isn't particularly complex, and while I don't have footage to show you, I can still visually give you a pretty good indication of what it's like. First, I must point out that the entrance sign is fantastic, but once you move under it into the covered but outdoor queue area, the theming isn't much different from Shrek 4D. It's mostly a series of switchbacks, accompanied by overhead TVs displaying ride information and trivia. However, once you enter the building itself, its small indoor queue is actually quite interesting. Based around Villain-Con, which was a convention hosted in Orlando from the first Minions film, The interior queue is set up with booths from various villains, most of which I believe are the Vicious Six, a group seen in Minions: The Rise of Gru. Each booth contrasts visually with one another, and a few interesting effects, props, and Easter eggs can be found throughout each one. Like in the film, the Vicious Six are recruiting their sixth member, and so that's why every rider is there. The job of the riders is to move through the different booths of the different villains, challenging each of them to earn their place. On leaving this room, riders will pick up these massive blasters from a revolving carousel in a hallway, and proceed into the last few switchbacks with an instructional video playing overhead. The ride system for Villain-Con requires you to stand, as it is a moving walkway similar to what's found in City Walk or a baggage carousel in an airport, twisting and turning riders around the building. Once it's your turn to board, team members instruct riders onto large dots one at a time, and from here, your blaster syncs up to the ride and allows you to begin firing. The first scene seems intended to be practice, and is set in what appears to be a factory, illustrating why you're standing on a conveyor belt, and it allows you to shoot up boxes which charges your blaster with different types of rays, such as freezing, fire, and a variety of others. The blaster itself also has two buttons, one for regular fire and the other for limited banana bombs, which causes more damage. Moving into the next scene, you first challenge Stronghold, and his booth appears to be set in an art gallery full of destructible props and paintings that reveal hidden items and power-ups. The conveyor next takes you to a small scene with Nunchuck, who flies down in a ship along a moving highway, akin in design to a rhythm game like Guitar Hero, with the entire scene sporting a synthwave aesthetic, not dissimilar to something like Far Cry 3, Blood Dragon. Riders next make their way into a pipe room that allows you to look into an aquarium, where the next foe is Jean-Claude, as the conveyor twists to take you to your next scene. Moving forward, riders now find themselves in a roller skating arena to fight Svengeance, with an aesthetic that reminds me a bit of the Ringling Brothers' Globe of Death. This scene is a little different from the others, with the action taking place on both sides of the conveyor, requiring you to turn between them. Next, riders will snake around a disco-themed stage where they'll have to try blasting at bell bottom, although so many people were attempting to hit the targets that the screen was completely overwhelmed, and you couldn't see much of what was happening. Finally, the conveyor brings you to Universal City Walk, revealing that the building has been blasted open as you fight a revolving roster of villains against the backdrop of icons such as the Universal Globe, Toothsome's Chocolate Emporium, and the Islands of Adventure Lighthouse. This roster seems to consist of villains from outside of the Vicious Six, including Scarlet Overkill, El Macho, Balthazar Brat, and Vector Perkins, all of which are represented on the exterior of the building. Once this scene concludes, you pass one final screen where it shows your score, letting you know that you'll never be good enough to join the Vicious Six. On stepping off of the conveyor and returning your blaster into a bin, you'll exit the ride into Evil Stuff, the gift shop located across from the Minion Mayhem themed Super Silly Stuff, which is a funny contrasting detail. Conceptually, Villain-Con sounds like an interesting attraction, especially since the moving conveyor is such a unique ride system. However, where the attraction fails is with its execution and gameplay. I managed to ride twice, and both times I encountered massive frame rate drops as I was attempting to shoot at the screens, and even when this wasn't happening, there were so many reticles from other players that it was difficult to even find your own. Another issue is that when so many people are shooting at once, there are so many explosions and light effects on screen that it's often impossible to tell what's happening. Also worth mentioning is that my blasters would also disconnect for significant chunks of time throughout the ride, and while they did manage to always return, it's not fun standing there without anything working for a scene or two. While the capacity on this attraction is great, as despite showing a 60-minute wait and having waited in a full line near the entrance, where I only waited around 25 minutes each time, I think that the gameplay is getting overloaded with too many riders, and so in order to keep it playable, that capacity might need to be severely reduced. However, even if the technical issues could be addressed, the core gameplay of this attraction is just downright boring. When Toy Story Mania opened in Hollywood Studios in 2008, I think that it very much was, and still is, a great ride, really pushing arcade-style shooters forward. Attractions such as Men in Black or the many versions of Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin were very popular, but what they couldn't really do is have a lot of dynamic effects that trigger when you hit the targets, only really allowing for very basic movement. Toy Story Mania fixed this with its screen-based and more focused gameplay, bringing you to different and tightly focused scenes that allowed you to compete directly with the person sitting right next to you. While it did lose that physical element that is also a huge appeal of other arcade shooters, this was very much a well thought out experience. However, the danger with this is that theme parks took the wrong lesson, not realizing that if you're going to incorporate video game elements into a ride, it actually has to be fun. We've since seen other versions of this, from the remarkably uninteresting ship piloting mechanics of Smuggler's Run, to the extremely similar Web Slingers. However, what distinguishes Toy Story Mania from these is how its scenes are all distinct, each using different themes and gameplay mechanics to allow the experience to make every moment feel unique and fulfilling. Darts move and feel differently from hoops, and each scene takes on distinct thematic differences based around a variety of Toy Story characters. While an attraction like Web Slingers does take you to different areas of Avengers Campus to distinguish its scenes, the gameplay of shooting at the generic spider bots is just fundamentally boring, and the mechanics stay the same throughout the entire experience. Worse, it's visually chaotic, and regardless of what you choose to interact with, Spider-Bot or not, nothing you do feels consequential, as much of what you're seeing is happening regardless of whether you're interacting with it. I think then that the danger with interactive video game rides is that they are designed to be simple enough for literally anyone to understand easily, but often suffer because the mechanics are a little too simple and inconsequential. As a counterexample, the shell shooting mechanic on Mario Kart is quite simple, but when you hit other enemy racers or course obstacles, they actually have complex reactions as a consequence of your direct action. The limited number of shells in each scene is also important, forcing you to consider when you use them instead of just sitting there and mashing the buttons. Of course, what really elevates this attraction is that you're actually moving through a real, physical space, and the gameplay is layered on top of it, fixing the issue that Toy Story Mania was trying to fix. However, when it comes to Villain-Con, it's much more comparable to Web Slingers. When you target the various villains, nothing you blast them with seems to really have much of an effect, and while there are various props hit on the screens, none of them are particularly interesting. The only scene I kind of liked was the art gallery, because it had more variety with what you could hit, but for the most part, it doesn't really feel like you accomplish anything throughout the entire experience. It's not really clear what your goal is, as the instructive videos literally say to target everything, and the experience comes off as completely inconsequential, as nothing really happens when you hit things. Yes, you do gain points, but that doesn't really matter if you're not having fun with the gameplay mechanics, or feeling the consequences of what you can hit. So, while the Minion theming was a nice refresh for Production Central, Villain-Con continues the park tradition of building new and boring screen-based attractions in a park that is already completely oversaturated with these types of experiences. Anticipating massive expansion with Epic Universe, I understand why Universal wanted to include more attractions that would appeal to younger kids, which would encourage more families to visit their expanding resort. But at a fundamental level, Villain-Con is broken, both technically and from a gameplay perspective. This is not the video I wanted to make, as Universal has really been turning around creatively over the past few years, and if Villain-Con had been great, I might have been praising how uniquely innovative it was. It's sad that this isn't the case though, and I plead with Universal leadership to try fixing this park. It needs real, physical dark rides that other parks seem to have no issues receiving, and I don't understand how what should be their flagship is continuing to not receive the investment that it needs. So, as always, if you've made it to the end, you can do me a favor by leaving a like. As always, if you want to stay up to date with my videos, I recommend hitting the subscribe button with bell notification so as to know when anything new is released.